You don't forget the kind of cold that cuts through bone like a knife. It was June 5, 1876, and we were caught in a fierce snowstorm between the Heart River and O'Fallon Creek. Just our luck. The storm pinned us down, and the wagon train didn't make it any farther than the Powder River. All the talk about moving toward the Rosebud turned out to be just that, talk. Somewhere between Miles City and the Rosebud, we passed a shallow valley with Indian burial scaffolds tucked into the trees. I remember it clear as day. Some of the men, G Troop mostly, decided to tear those graves down. They took what they could carry and dumped the bones into the Yellowstone. I heard one of them say they'd regret it. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. A few days later, as we followed the Rosebud, you could see where the Indian ponies had grazed both sides of the trail down to bare earth. That was a sign, if there ever was one, we weren't far behind a large force. We moved out again around noon on the 22nd. We'd been camped in a patch of timber east of the Rosebud's mouth. Instead of following the river, we crossed over some hills and rejoined it further upstream, sticking to its western side. From the way I remember it, Custer followed much the same trail folks now drive along. There was always talk about Bob Jackson and Billy Cross, how they supposedly made it across at Ford A. But nobody I knew saw them during the Valley fight, or across the river either. I doubt they made it at all. As for Reno's push into the valley, G, A, and M troops led the charge, in that order. Once we passed the ford, the command halted to form a line. I heard someone shout, "There goes Custer," pointing to a figure on the far hills. Sure enough, you could see him across the river, a solitary rider. We dismounted about 200 yards short of the timber and fanned out into a skirmish line. G Troop anchored the right, A was center, M on the left. No real cover to the right, just open land. But there were warriors in the trees ahead, firing at us from the southwest in a slanted line that made you feel like the bullets were coming from everywhere. I remember that line extending out west of the trees, not exactly where most maps show it. I caught a glimpse of Charlie Reynolds. He was on foot, wounded, pistol in hand, trying to follow the retreat. Brave man. My own horse got hit, turned wild. Couldn't steer him. He just ran, and somehow carried me out of there. I held on for dear life and thanked my luck. We were ordered off the skirmish line and into the timber. I went in to find my horse and ran into Wallace, who was already mounted and leading G Troop out. "Where's my horse?" I called out. Wallace didn't miss a beat. "Grab any horse you can and get the hell out." That was the kind of day it was. I figured we'd been out there maybe 20 minutes. Fired about 20 rounds. Ravines to the west were crawling with warriors taking shots at us from an angle. Some even worked their way behind us, across the river, circling around. I could see them through the trees. Inside the timber, I saw Gilbert leading 4 horses, one of them was mine. I shouted at him to follow the rest and fell in behind. We were among the last to make it out. Maybe 100 yards from the trees, I saw Reynolds again, wounded, standing his ground, pistol raised. That's the last I saw of him. My horse got hit again, right in the jaw. He went down hard, but jumped up once more. I scrambled back on, but lost my carbine in the process. Only had my sidearm. We crossed the river, deep enough to hit the horse's belly, and started the climb up the bluff. He bled bad, couldn't keep going, so I left him halfway up. Back on the bluff, folks were saying Reno planned to push on to Custer. I turned to Moylan and said, "Captain, I'm dismounted." He just told me flatly, "Well, get one." Not exactly comforting, but he was right. If we moved out and I was on foot, I'd be done for. About 10 minutes after reaching the top, Benteen showed up. Talk started up again about linking up with Custer. I ended up heading halfway back down to the river to recover another mount. When Captain Benteen finally reached us, tensions were already high and the air thick with the sense of something awful having gone wrong. Captain Roy rode out ahead to get a look beyond the hills, but soon came tearing back with the Sioux hot on his heels. As dusk crept in, gunfire picked up, steady and punishing. That night, the 25th of June, one of our men, King, was hit. As darkness fell, we went to work. Makeshift breastworks were thrown together out of whatever we could find, mostly dead horses and gear. When the firing paused, Major Reno came over to Captain Moylan and ordered him to select a non-commissioned officer and 6 volunteers to move out ahead of Company A's position and hold a forward picket. Moylan called on several sergeants. One after the next either declined or gave reasons not to go. One had been wounded, another was slated to take over as first sergeant, and a third simply claimed he was too worn out from a previous night's duty. When my name was called, I didn't hesitate, but I told the captain I'd only go if enough men stepped forward to go with me. A few brave souls answered the call: Connor, Gilbert, Bancroft, McClurg, and Harris. One more man offered, then changed his mind before we even left. I agreed to take first watch alongside one of them. Before we headed out, I reported to Reno for instructions. His orders were clear: move out one at a time, keep your heads low, and maintain silence except for quiet conversation between 2 of us on each shift to ensure we stayed awake. He added this grim bit: if the Indians started shooting early, we were to scatter and run for the breastworks. No bunching up. No heroics. Just get back alive. We made it out and held our ground through the night, hiding among the grass and sagebrush. When the first shots came at dawn, we pulled back just as we were told: calm, quiet, and in formation. Captain Moylan later pulled me aside and commended the way we handled the detail. That meant something, coming from him. Then the real storm began. The sun had barely cleared the horizon on June 26 when the Sioux came at us hard. They swarmed the hill like riders in a wild race, hundreds of them circling, shooting from all sides. Their fire was relentless, cutting down everything in front of our line, even the thick sagebrush we'd used for cover. A light rain fell around noon, but it wasn't enough to help. We tried catching droplets on our ponchos, but barely got a mouthful. Thirst set in bad. One man, Cowley, went out of his mind from it. We had to restrain him for his own safety. Around mid-morning, Frank C. Mann, a civilian packer who'd joined us, was killed. He was crouched behind our breastworks with a carbine propped up, steady in the sights for what must have been 20 minutes. Someone finally noticed he wasn't moving. We checked on him. He'd been shot clean through the temple. Never twitched. Died with his hands still on the rifle. Around 11 o'clock, we managed to pull more dead horses into position to strengthen our defenses. We extended our line toward Benteen's group. That adjustment saved lives. If you ask me, Benteen was the one who held this whole thing together. The man had grit and a level head when it counted most. Still, the heat and thirst were getting unbearable. The wounded were desperate for water, their lips cracked and voices hoarse from asking. Finally, some of the enlisted men started murmuring about making a run to the river. Officers caught wind of it and said that if anyone was willing to risk it, they wouldn't be stopped. Soon, 19 men stepped forward. Too many, we were told. The number was trimmed to 12. We agreed to carry 2 canteens each and 6 big camp kettles between us. Sergeant Feller and a handful of sharpshooters covered our flank, keeping the west bank of the river in their sights to prevent a full Indian rush. But the banks were crawling with Sioux, hiding among the trees and brush, waiting to pick off anyone trying to reach the water. To get there, we had to sprint across a bare stretch of about 100 yards before diving into a ravine that ran down toward the river. From there, we had some cover, enough to breathe and plan. Once we reached the bottom, just 20 yards from the river's edge, we saw Sioux across the water in the undergrowth, but we held our fire. We weren't looking for a fight, just water. We drew straws, basically. Called off names, one man at a time. The first guy to go came back with a kettle sloshing full. We all took a long pull, our first drink in a day and a half. Wilbur went next, he got hit. Madden followed, caught one in the leg, but managed to crawl back under his own strength. Big man, bleeding bad. Asked to be left where he was, the pain was too much to move again. But we didn't abandon him. He was carried up before nightfall. My turn came fifth. I made the dash, filled up, and got back. After Madden was hit, we held off for a while, maybe 30 minutes. Then picked it up again. 1 or 2 at a time, always checking the brush for movement, always crouched low. We spent nearly an hour in that ravine, rushing back and forth to the river, filling canteens from the kettles. Every drop mattered. By the time we made it back to the top of the bluff, we had enough to help the worst off. Lieutenant Varnum stood guard over the water while Dr. Porter rationed it out. There wasn't nearly enough to satisfy the wounded, but it gave them something, a fighting chance. Late that day, the gunfire finally began to let up. The Sioux seemed to lose interest, maybe figured they'd done enough. As night settled over the ridge, we dug shallow pits leading toward the river, carving out a safer path to get more water. That night, for the first time in days, we had enough to go around. And for just a moment, a brief, fragile moment, we could breathe. That night brought an unexpected surprise. 4 men we'd long given up for dead suddenly walked back into camp. Scout Fred Gerard, Bill Jackson, Lieutenant DeRudio, and Private Tom O'Neill showed up out of the darkness. It was DeRudio who called out first. George Bott from a troop was on sentry duty and challenged the voice, as he should. The reply came back steady, Lieutenant DeRudio. Once the password was cleared, the guard passed him through. You could feel the shift in camp. A kind of cautious joy. We'd all assumed they'd been killed or captured, no one thought they'd survived after being cut off during the chaos. Turns out they'd been hiding out and moving carefully for days. We'd noticed the Sioux pulling back the previous evening, June 26th, but we weren't sure if it was genuine or just another trap. Either way, we weren't taking chances. It wasn't until the morning of the 27th that we dared lead the horses down to the river. They were in pitiful shape, many hadn't had a real drink in 2 days. I watched them bury their muzzles deep in the water, desperate, nearly drowning themselves in the process. Later that day, the 7th Infantry arrived and set up camp down in the valley, about where Lieutenant McIntosh had fallen. The men from Gibbon's command showed true character. They shared everything they had, sugar, lemon rations, anything that could help ease the pain for our wounded. Those small comforts meant the world. By the 28th, things began to shift from survival to cleanup. I was assigned to put down roughly 20 wounded horses that had been left behind or had limped away after being hit. Some had staggered off the bluffs during the retreat on the 25th. Others had wandered from the hill during the 2 days of siege. It was grim, necessary work, mercy, really. That same morning, we finally made the solemn march to the Custer battlefield to bury the fallen. We transported the wounded across the river to a makeshift camp set up near the remains of the village. Some were able to ride, but about 30 men were too far gone. We carried them on blankets, rotating in shifts. The infantry lent hands where they could. When we reached the field, we moved in skirmish formation and began burial detail. We followed what we believed to be Custer's trail. At one bend, the path dipped close to the river, maybe a last attempt to get water or reposition. The first body we came across was Corporal John Foley from C Company. Several men recognized him immediately. "That's Foley," someone said. He had a bald crown and thick black hair, hard to mistake. Middle-aged, quiet, good soldier. His body was lying almost 3/4 of a mile ahead of the main cluster near the C Company line. Not far behind him we found Sergeant Butler, lying about halfway between Foley's position and the first group of dead. No horses nearby, just the men. They'd clearly been on foot when they died, or their mounts had been led away or taken. I took part in the burial effort along the western slope of the ridge. Toward the end, we reached the men from E Troop, those who'd fallen near a gully. That was where I had to step away. The stench of death and sun-baked flesh had finally gotten to me. I stumbled down to the river and dipped my hands into the water, hoping it might wash the sickness from my gut.